Welcome to an extremely special edition of the India Development Debate right here. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and this is an issue extremely close to my heart and the hearts of many of our viewers there. It really is India's moment of truth and the moment of shame, if I may. The Me Too movement, triggered by actress Tanushree Dutta's accusations against Bollywood personalities Nana Patekar and director Vivek Agnihotri, has opened a can of worms, with new names tumbling out of the closet every moment. Data provided by the National Commission for Women shows a 45% jump in work-related sexual harassment cases between 2014 and 2017. With more women coming forth narrating their harrowing experience at workplace, it is becoming clear that the current safeguards are not preventive enough. But are frivolous cases being reported too, and can they potentially weaken what is really a powerful movement whose time has come? What will it then take to make India a safer, fairer place for working women? And that is the big topic of discussion and debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. Joining us is a stellar panel of very, very accomplished, opinionated women right here, with a perspective that's unmatched. Shobha Dey, journalist and columnist, joins us right here. She's a social commentator as well. Nandita Gurjar, former HR head of Infosys. Trisha Shetty, founder and CEO of She Says India. Karuna Nandi, and constitutional and media lawyer, is going to be joining us shortly. And of course, the consulting editor of the Times of India, Sagarika Ghosh, joins us as well. So thanks each one of you for being with us. This is an issue, like I said, extremely close to my heart, and I know it's close to all your hearts as well. This is India's moment of truth or moment of shame, whichever way you look at this. And it looks like Me Too storm is gathering pace. Sagarika, if I may begin with you, is India's Me Too storm a sign of women who are angry, who are no longer afraid to speak out? Is this a sign, rather, of the end of self-doubt and judgment that society instills upon us?
Supriya, I think hats off to these courageous and brave women who are daring to speak out in a way that perhaps generations ago women would not have dared, simply because the asymmetry in the power equation between powerful men and not so powerful, fairly defenseless women was so high. The asymmetry in the power equation was so high that women did not dare to speak out, and as a result we today have had a moral crisis. It's a abysmal moral failing that we have, that men who are powerful, who can wield power, are taking advantage of their power and preying on defenseless women in the way they have. Hats off to Tanushree. I think she has been brave. She's spoken out, and think about it, the attitudes. The fact is, when she spoke out, you saw that notorious, and I use the word notorious advisedly, press conference of Salman Khan, the famous actor, where he rubbished the reporter who was bringing up Tanushree's accusations against actor Nana Patekar, and he sort of said that this is not my problem and I don't want to talk about it, and what are you here to talk about, young lady, or something like that. Why are you bringing this up at this particular press conference? He turned the tables on the young woman reporter. It was shocking to me the way Salman Khan literally acted as if he was abusing that woman journalist who dared to bring up Tanushree Dutta's accusations against Nana Patekar, and since then we've seen women in media come out very, very strongly. And you know, Supriya, I have to say that this is time for media houses, English, Hindi, regional, to really walk the talk on gender justice in the newsrooms, because I have played a part in internal complaints committees of sexual harassment committees, and I know that those sexual harassment committees are not as strong as they should be. They have jurisdiction only on sexual harassment that happens at the workplace and not outside the workplace. So there are certain nuances of that internal complaints committees that have to be looked at. But it is time that this moral crisis is broken, and that newsrooms across India.
Sagarika, give me a minute now. I'll have to come in and I'll Okay, you know, Sagarika, you raise a very important point, and just for the benefit of our viewers, I want to point out here, this isn't just about newsrooms. This is about corporate India. This is about working women all over the place. And I'm going to go across to Shobha Dey for her comments. And Shobha Dey, Sagarika chooses to call this defenseless women who are now being brave enough to voice the harrowing experiences that they've had as professionals. My question to you is far more direct than this. Is this the worst reflection of what is patriarchy. I mean, how do you explain this, repeated incidents by men? It's not just Tanushree Dutta, it's not just Bollywood, it's not just journalism that's fested with this. Repeated incidents where men, is this a case of hierarchy? Is this a case of patriarchy? I fail to understand this, because if it was just patriarchy and if it was just social norms, it would be confined to places like India. It's happening all the way in the United States as well. So what will you attribute this to?
I would first of all say that this is the world's worst kept secret. It's been going on for years. It's a global disease. It's not restricted to Bollywood, Hollywood, showbiz. It's across the board. What I think Tanushree has achieved is in becoming a very important catalyst. This is no longer about one individual. It's not about Tanushree, but what Tanushree has triggered off. It's a wake-up call. You call it a moment of shame. I would like to think it's a moment of tremendous change and tremendous awareness, because suddenly we are asking questions that were taboo. Suddenly women are getting up and saying, we are not going to shut up and put up. That is the biggest change, and that is not going to be restricted at an elite level, corporate level. I think it's going to give courage to a lot of women, even at the lowest rungs of corporate life or in the workplace, in any field, to say we are not going to put up with this. Now, what are the repercussions? I'm more concerned about that. I hear a lot of men saying, in that case, we really don't want to employ women. We can easily get males to substitute for the women in our offices. We don't want to be monitored. We don't want to be constantly questioned. We don't want to become the villains of every narrative. And why are women playing victims? A lot of them have gone along with this. They've gone along with it for various reasons. Most of those reasons are helplessness, powerlessness, and economic reasons, where a woman is in a situation where really it's very tough for her to fend off those kind of advances. But if there is going to be that kind of a backlash against women, then we need to be equally concerned about that, because it's a question of jobs and a work environment that provides a sense of security. How do we sanitize that work environment is more important than everybody going up in arms and screaming that, you know, this happened to me and that happened to me. So basically we need to know whether what kind of a surgical strike is needed so that we can completely clean up this environment.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. And I have an entire segment that's dedicated to how workplaces need to be sanitized, how men and women need to be made aware of what is sexual harassment and when do you cross that line, and you should not be crossing that line. I'm coming to that in just a bit, but I want to get opening comments from my entire panel here. And Trisha Shetty, as a society, we try to silence women because issues like these seemingly, quote unquote, bring shame upon us. And which is why it's pertinent to ask that harassment at work is a reflection of social mindset. Is it, at the end of the day, a game of hierarchy and one of patriarchy?
Look, I think you've touched upon a few important points. One, the idea that harassment, when comes to light, brings shame upon an institution is a highly perturbing one, and that in itself needs to be completely rejected. Harassment does not bring shame onto an institution. No institution can claim that there is zero harassment. Harassment could happen anywhere, then be in a temple or at a workplace. What is incumbent upon the institution is it following regulations, is it following protocol, and how it reacts to these harassment allegations. As for is it patriarchy? What is it? Of course it's patriarchy. Of course it's the fact that women have been deliberately and actively silenced for so long. Women have not found their voices now. Women have been speaking up, but the systems in place have deliberately silenced their voices, which is why kudos to the women who've come forward. Kudos to Mahima, who came forward and set this whole storm in motion. What is worrying to me is, who is the official saying we won't hire women anymore? I mean, what kind of, I'm sorry to use this, but what kind of BS is this? Your worry should be, how do we sanitize workplaces? How do we make sure that POSH is being implemented? How do we make sure that you're handling cases with transparency? The idea that, if you hire women, you will then not know how to curb men who are harassing women is in itself highly worrisome. So I hope that through this conversation, we will not even be addressing that, because that is a very disturbing and patriarchal notion to put forward. And lastly, if I may, what is astoundingly clear is that most of these men are repeat offenders. They do not stop with harassing one woman, and they will not stop. The reason being because their power has gone unchecked, their abuse has gone unchecked, which is what's great about the Me Too movement.
Right,
It's women
right.
coming forward in solidarity, saying
Okay.
this has happened to me too, and there lies the power. And the last distinction, if I may, India's Me Too movement is different because it is not led by
Right.
the Bollywood. It is not led by influential women. It is led by day-to-day women taking to social media, denouncing men in power, and reclaiming their power and
Right.
agency. India's Me Too movement is led by day-to-day warriors
Okay.
supporting each other.
Okay.
It is not
Trisha.
time in Bollywood.
Right. I agree with you. This is not, India's Me Too movement is not out of some investigative report that was done. It is not out of some leading luminaries coming out. It is by all, working women, everyday working women who battle this. They're coming out and telling their horror stories. And I think as a society, we need to really review, we need to really think how much shame we put on this. I mean, I remember the first day Tanushree Dutta's press conference, I mean, 8 out of 10 people that we spoke to dismissed this as a publicity stunt. And look at how this entire thing has snowballed. So there is no looking away from this. You can't any longer be a bystander. You cannot turn a blind eye. But I'm going to take this across to Nandita Gujar before I go across to Karuna Nandi as well. And Nandita, if you actually look at the repercussions it's having, and we will talk about why people are quiet and all of that in just a bit, and more work culture in a while. But if you look at the repercussions it's having, Tanbay Bhatt, the founder of AIB, has been asked to step out. Vishal's show has been sacked from, has been stopped at Amazon. The editor of a paper has been sacked. I mean, these are very decisive steps that organizations are taking. But will these decisive steps put the fear in men to appropriate their behavior? Will this be a wake-up call for better behavior? Because the law has been in place, and most organizations, barring very few, have have committees. They get experts, they have trainings. Is this decisive? Are these decisive steps going to decide and force the men to behave better?
So I think the first steps of firing somebody from that position is a good step. It gives a very, very strong message. However, the whole act of somebody complaining, the media taking it on, there is a lot of publicity, and therefore the person is asked to go, is in my view a very, very wrong way to lead this point. Because after the incident has happened, what did these organizations do to ensure that it does not repeat? Right? Did they put in steps to ensure that this does not happen again? Two, the cases that we see are very highly publicized ones, right? Whereas the common ones of a working woman who goes to work every day is not getting publicized, right? So there should be some kind of a forum where they come in and say that this organization is uncomfortable and threatening to me because there are no policies in place which make this into a workplace for women, right? So I don't see that happening yet. Right now we are just talking about this, and it seems to be so far away from the common man or the common woman, right? So what are these organizations doing? For example, the cases that you mentioned, what are they going to do going ahead to ensure that there is very strict consequence in even a small fashion? Let's not talk about the high, the Hollywood or the Bollywood people. What happens if a cameraman and a camera woman, somebody does a sexual harassment and reports it, right? Since there is no publicity, will they still take the same action? Is there a same consequence for a person who is junior or who is a middle manager than for a person who's senior? I think when women start seeing that happening in organizations, saying regardless of who is and to whom it is happening, the same consequences meted out, that's when there is more confidence which is going to come in this movement. Otherwise, right now, it's a lot of show and tell. There's a lot of publicity, everybody is having an opinion on it, everybody is happy to give their opinions on it, but frankly, nothing much is changing on the ground.
No, that's an important point, and I think that's a point worth considering, that while show and tell and name and shame is important for a wake-up call, but there needs to be a forum, institutional practices in place for us to make a decisive turn from here. But let me take this across to Karuna Nandi. And Karuna, why is it, and you know, this really belies me, because this is an issue that you know, should get people talking. But why is it that many vocal men, big influential opinion makers, professionals, big actors who are extremely vocal otherwise, are conspicuously silent on this subject? Are there too many skeletons in their own cupboard? Is there fear of upsetting colleagues? I mean, why are the Twitter timeline is full of very opinionated women taking a call on this? But, you know, very often the men on my timeline and the influencers on my timeline are extremely silent on this.
I think they're scared, and the reason they're scared is not necessarily just because of skeletons, though I suspect most men have, even men who are otherwise really quite progressive, have made a comment here and a sort of tweet there on, you know, abusing their power a little bit, or rather, you know, in a more subtle way, sort of exercising what they perceive as their entitlement. And people are being scared of being called out, because at the moment the sort of tide of anger is so great that it's washing away a lot of sort of everything else in its wake. And you can understand why that is and why that's coming from, because if you are a woman who, and you know, most women have faced something like this, whether it's at the workplace, whether it's you know, at home, whether it's on the street, though of course at home where this happens a lot, it's something that's not being talked about in the Me Too movement, or on the street it's not being talked about. It's mainly when there's someone known or when there's someone famous, and it's the kind of, I suppose now we can call it the Cavanaugh effect, the Brett Kavanaugh effect, right? Like, which is that when someone does something to you and then they rise to a particular level and benefit from society's approbation, or when they sort of act sort of justice oriented and progressive, then it's particularly irking. So I think that's why there's a particular silence there. But I also want to make two other points. One is that when we talk about internal complaints committees, yes, it's true that there are many organizations, for example, on a film, you know, and the producer will not usually have the ICC in place, even though they'll have more than 10 employees, because keep in mind that employees is very widely defined. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, over 90% of our women work in the informal sector. And so because of that, the Act also, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, also envisages local area committees, which are to be set up by the government. And this serves two functions. One is that if you are, say, a freelancer, if you're even a freelancer journalist and comedian, then you have somewhere else to go if it's not in the performance of employment, where if the harassment has happened elsewhere. Two, it sets up a just alternative to the ICC, which can sometimes be biased.
Yeah. Right. Karuna, that's a subject that I want to deal with in greater detail, because I want to talk about the experts on that panel, how they need to be trained better. You know, is it all about just influential people in the organization being a part of ICC? I have very specific questions on that, and I'm going to turn to you in just a bit on that. But to Shobha Day, you know, while I'm all for Me Too, I don't think there are any two ways about it. I think women who are coming out there are extremely brave. To share a very personal experience takes a lot of guts. But do we also at the same time run the risk of the issue being trivialized, because there are some frivolous cases, you know, some flirting here, some drunk behavior there, that is also being reported. I mean, issues which were once consensual have now been reported as Me Too. I mean, while Me Too is very important, but will complaints and issues like these dwarf what is a movement and what this really stands for? Because, you know, discrediting these women is very easy, and that's what most men would want any of us to do. But the reality also is that this is a very powerful movement. It's a very relevant movement. Do we run the risk of trivializing it?
Well, the thing is this, that as you said, it's a very relevant, very powerful movement, but because it is so, it has touched a lot of emotional chords. Because it has touched emotional chords across the board, it's bound to have a sort of domino effect. And it's not as if people want to cash in on it, because that's a very crass way of looking at it and being very dismissive towards legitimate grouses. What can happen, and there can be missteps, because not every single man in the workplace is a devil or a predator. Not every single woman who's complaining is a victim or helpless or a vamp. But despite the shortcomings of even a movement of this kind, raising some kind of charges which may or may not be substantiated, may or may not be true, it's still a very important dialogue that has been initiated. This dialogue must not be ignored, because it can lead eventually to change. Now, a lot of men that we are talking about in this context, we are trying to treat them like juvenile delinquents, which they are not. When we talk about training or deconditioning men, or at the workplace establishing new rules of conduct, it's as if we are sitting there like heads of disciplinary schools and telling men how they should behave at the workplace. This is something that should be a part of our social fabric, social culture. People should know how to behave with one another. It's just respectful for people to identify those lines and stick to them. Why that is not happening, we've talked about patriarchy, we've talked about abuse of power. Yes, of course, it's all interlinked. Why are very, very powerful men not talking? Because they're probably watching their own back. It's like an old boys club. They are protecting one another. Who's going to throw the first stone? It happens, we're talking about government interventions. There's a lot of this in government too. So which person is going to put himself on the line and say, I'm going to stand up for women? There may be 10 charges being flung at that very person. So a lot of men are indeed guilty, and they're indeed vulnerable. The silence is on account of a lot of money at stake, and no one wants to be out there defending something which he himself may be guilty of, and that is the truth.
Right. Fair point. That's an important point there. But Sagarika, I think there's a question on everybody's mind today. And it's only fair that I ask the question. And I agree with Shobha Dey that, even though there may be cases that may be coming out that may seemingly, feel frivolous, this must have been a powerful moment for that women. And because it's such an emotional issue, she's putting it out there. Fair point indeed. Let's not dilute the issue. But where does one draw the line? Is every compliment, banter, I like your dress, you look beautiful today, sexual harassment? Because there have been some frivolous cases that are being reported, and even though it may be happening out of being emotionally driven, these do tarnish reputations.
Supriya, that's very true. I think, as Shobha said, we don't want to become a nation of moral policemen where we're laying down that this is not allowed and that is not allowed. But having said that, I think, even though there is a risk of trivialization and frivolity, I think the fundamental reset in the power symmetry is so important that for the moment, we can leave the frivolities to one side, because the reset in power is so important. And what I want to emphasize is a quote actually that I found, which I think is very, very telling. This says, the enemy of feminism isn't men, it's patriarchy. And patriarchy is not men, it's a system. And women can support the system of patriarchy just as men can support the fight for gender justice. So ultimately, it's about gender justice and not about a men versus woman thing. It's not about bad men versus good women. It's not about the powerful masculine alpha male preying on the sort of defenseless young woman, which becomes a kind of fantasy in itself. It's not that. It's about democratic citizens who may be men, who may be women, committed to gender justice and committed to fighting patriarchy. Patriarchy is like feudalism. It's like caste abuse. It's like superstition. It is a social evil. It's something that irrational, civic-minded, democratic 21st century citizens need to fight. Men need to fight this own version of toxic masculinity, which is as oppressive to men, I would say, as gender injustices are to women. So men and women equally suffer gender stereotyping and gender injustices, and the fight against patriarchy is a common one. So, Supriya, while you say that, you're absolutely right, that there are trivializations, there are frivolities, that, a compliment is now suddenly considered not acceptable. We certainly don't want to go down the way of a nanny state. But at the same time, I think we need to establish that this is a common fight for a common cause. It's a cause that oppresses men as much as it oppresses women.
Yeah, and that has to be the overarching.
A man into behaving in a certain
No, I agree with you. I think I agree with you on the fundamental reset of power.
That's the goal. It's a common goal.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on the fundamental reset of power mechanism and power equations. But let me take this debate to where the real issues for real working women and most of us lies. And I'm going to come to you, Nandita Gurjar, because you've got experience with this. Is there a risk that Me Too can turn into not her? There are some who believe that the unintended workplace consequences of a movement as big as this could be grave. It could make companies wary, rethink, doubt decisions to hire women. It has been said in the panel before, but let's take the bull by its horns. Could Me Too turn into not her?
So let me talk from personal experience. When we rolled out the anti-sexual harassment policy at Infosys, this was in 1999, I mean, 20 years ago, we had the same reaction from men, both from men as well as from women. The men were all up to saying, what does this mean? I mean, how do we even have a conversation now with women in our teams? What if I say something like, oh, you're looking nice today, or, you're wearing a pretty dress today? Does that mean it's sexual harassment? The women came back and said, how do we differentiate between harassment, by a manager versus sexual harassment? Right? And so there was this whole uncomfortable piece of saying, why are you introducing a policy where we do not know the rules of the game? I mean, how do we deal with this? So I think the answer lies in getting into the details of answering each of these questions very, very clearly and specifically. And I disagree with the earlier points which said that, we don't want to be nanny, we do not want to create a nanny culture. Unfortunately, sometimes, when you're introducing something new in a workplace, you probably need to create a nanny culture for some time till it starts becoming a culture. And then, you sort of let go and you don't need to do the policing anymore. But unless you specifically tell them that, for example, you're looking great today, can be told in a tone or a sneer or in a posture which can seem as if she feels sexually threatened. It's not just the words, it is the whole package which goes with it, right? Now, if she comes and complains and says, he told me I'm looking good today, and he says, look, what's wrong in that statement, there is much more to it. So the answer again lies in having an investigation committee, in saying that there is no complaint which is small unless you investigate it thoroughly. Ensure that there is confidentiality, ensure that there is trust, that there is no fear for the victim to come and complain and put this on the table. And regardless of who it is, whether it's leadership
Nandita,
or a junior person, everyone gets treated the same way.
Oh yeah, that's very important. And I also think the investigation complaints committee that's now mandated by law needs to have external people as also a mandate, and that is what makes things transparent. No complaint is small to be brushed away. I think that's the big takeaway from there. But Trisha, if I may come to you, and there are a lot of men who've written into us, who've talked to us, who've called us. They are very wary of how things are turning out. And, while I think there's some truth that lies in Sagrika's argument of this not being a nanny state, and there's obviously a lot of truth that lies in Nandita's that, perhaps there is merit in making it nanny for a while till things take off. Men are raising important questions. Do you keep a door ajar when you're in room with the women talking on a work issue? Do you never get yourself clicked in a picture with just one woman? Men are increasingly wary of direct women reportees. I mean, these are things that will eventually heighten the glass ceiling that we so desperately want to break. And I'm going to talk about solutions in just a bit, but this is a risk that we run, do we not? I mean, I know hypocritically speaking, we'll say, no, there's no risk we run. But these are real issues, and real issues that every working woman will have to deal with.
I'll tell you this. These questions in itself pains me, because the facts of the matter is, one, let's stop painting women as emotional, hysterical beings. The only people putting forward their insecurity, their fear, and their hysteria, because it's a highly gendered word when I use the word hysteria, is the few insecure men here who are worried by the wave of strong women saying, we will not be silenced anymore. So let's be honest. Firstly, the data that says women put forth false allegations is a very small marginal number. Most data shows that women do not report crimes, then be it sexual harassment, rape, or any sort of harassment, women do not report. Even after they do report, the systems that are set in place, okay, you go to a police station, be it in an urban city like Mumbai or other cities, the police stations more often than not will systematically harass you. More often than not, they will not file an FIR. They will instead file an NC. If you go to your workplace, ICCs in a lot of workplaces are not set up, so you don't know where to go. The third layer being the judicial system. Even if you go through all of those hurdles, you finally go through the judicial system. It takes upwards of 2 to 3 years for cases to be even processed. Forget fast track court cases. Even when it comes to POXO cases, it takes up to 2 years for cases to be tried. Okay, so do not tell me that women will go through all of this, get re-victimized at every step of the way, only because they're emotional, vindictive beings and do not know how to take a compliment. Let me finish, please. Do not know how to take a compliment. The idea that some men here, some insecure, small men here, do not want to do the homework, do not want to implement ICC, do not want to actually listen to women and say for so long workplaces have not been safe. What can we do to stop dismissing your voices to make it safe is highly worrisome. And lastly, I've seen a few journalists talk about how sending pictures of their genitalia is creepy behavior and not harassment. Let me correct it. For anyone who's watching, anyone who sends you unsolicited pictures of their penises, of their genitalia, is harassment at the first go. It is a crime recognized by the IPC as well as the IT Act. You do not have to rebuff the offer and then the person harasses you again for it to be harassment. The very first notion of sending such pictures of harassing you qualifies as harassment and you can go and file a complaint.
No, absolutely. I think these are things that people need to be made aware of. But before I move to the aware part and before I move to what organizations need to do and how does the ICC need to behave and what sort of people need to be trained for that, what sort of awareness needs to be made in organizations, I also think the counter question to the question that I had asked both Trisha and Nanta Gurjar also is, Karunanandi, is it an excuse to now exclude women from places we are already excluded from? Is this an all-new excuse? Because it's nonsensical at one level for women, for men to fear anything if they are innocent. I mean, like Trisha pointed out there, women are not hysterical beings. We can take an honest, healthy compliment in our stride. And most cases that come to me, and I think it's on national television, I'll say, I also head the sexual harassment committee in our network, and you know, some of the cases that come to us are frivolous. It is judgment that all of us put together, hearing both sides of the story, but there are many that are extremely grave sometimes, and we've got to take a call. So my larger question is that, you know, do men have anything to fear if they are actually innocent and professional?
Privilege and supremacy are a habit, then justice feels like oppression. And so I think that, you know, when you're used to just basically doing whatever you want whenever a thought comes to you, then to have to think about it and to reset, I think as Sagarika said quite nicely, to reset yourself, to
Okay, I want to go to Karunanandi because I think I want to make that point, and please connect her back to me very quickly. But Shobha, if I may quickly ask you a question, because I think I also need to take a quick breather here. I have a lot of, you know, a lot of people now question, what is the right workplace etiquette? You know, should you be shaking hands? Should there be no hugs? We call each other endearment sometimes. Should we stop that? But the reality also is the new age bulge culture is you are spending all your waking hours at work. Is it not all right to call somebody a sweetheart or a darling or honey without making them feel uncomfortable? So what are the new rules of a workplace? Like we said, you know, it perhaps needs to be something that doesn't make the woman uncomfortable, doesn't threaten her sexually, but at the same time, these rules are changing and men and women both need to adjust to it.
First of all, I think we need a new rule book because the old rules simply do not apply. And not every man who says to a woman that you're looking nice or great this morning, or you're wearing a terrific sari, is out to harass her. So let's get that clear. It's going to take away a lot of just human interaction if we are going to be so paranoid about every compliment that comes our way. Having said that, I think almost every woman instinctively knows how a certain compliment is being paid. And if that compliment also has another agenda to it, and if there is even a suggestion after the compliment that, hey, you're looking great, why don't we go out for a drink, why don't you meet me later, why don't you send me pictures of yourself, why don't you talk to me late at night on Skype, etc., etc. These are the rules that are already in place, and we recognize them, we know the boundaries, we know where to stop, we know where to draw the line. It's the ambiguous, nebulous areas at the workplace which are going to be redefined. It's going to take a while. So whether it's a shake hand or a namaste or a darling or a sweetheart, I think we'll have to negotiate this over some the next few months, maybe the next few years. Till then, let's not treat each other as, enemies, or the workplace as a combat zone or a war zone. It's not needed. I think men have understood that this is a very, very serious moment in the workplace history, that women are simply not going to take it lying down.
Right.
And they're not going to accept things at face value.
Okay.
They are going to be speaking up. They are going to be challenging the status quo. And they are going to be speaking back to authority and men in power.
Right.
As long as that is understood, I think men are not that
Precisely. That's an important point.
They will have to modify their behavior and not use drunken evenings
Fair point.
as
Okay.
a camouflage or an excuse. Because women certainly don't behave like that when they've had a drink or two.
Or
They don't
say the
turn
text
to
was actually meant for my
instant,
wife.
Rapists
Right.
and molesters.
No, or use the excuse that the text was actually meant for my wife. But I think Karuna Nandi was making a very important point there about what do men have to fear if they're innocent and if they are not in the wrong. Do they need to fear anything at all if they're innocent? We'll have to take a quick break on that note. We'll come back and continue the conversation with Karuna Nandi in just a while, and with all my other panelists, Shobha Dey, Sagrika Ghosh, Nanta Gujar, and of course Trisha Shetty. Just stay with us. I'm taking a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. This is a fascinating discussion. Me Too is taking India by a storm, but its time has certainly come.